Welcome to the CloudCare podcast, where we ignite impact in behavioral health and human services, one conversation at a time. Join Bob Bates, CEO of ContinuumCloud, as he explores the evolving landscape of behavioral health, uncovering the latest trends, challenges, and innovations shaping the future of care. From expert insights to real-world success stories, every episode is designed to inspire action and drive meaningful change. Powered by ContinuumCloud, the only platform built for behavioral health, we're here to help you address the workforce crisis, improve clinical outcomes, and achieve financial sustainability. Ready to make an impact? Let's dive in.
Hello, everybody. This is Bob Bates, CEO of ContinuumCloud, and I'm here with Denny, Morrison, and Jamie Stewart. And they have put together probably 3 or 4 years in behavioral health. I joke, and it's probably in the 40s, maybe 50s, and I don't want to give away their age. But our topic today is leading in turbulent times. So if you don't mind, can you take a minute and introduce yourselves and kind of tell a little bit about your background?
Yeah, my name is Denny Morrison. I'm a psychologist by training. I've been in mental health for, 40 years or more now. But years ago, I moved into management and ultimately was the CEO of a mental health center for 13 years, which is where Jamie and I met. Jamie served as chief financial officer at that organization, and we have remained friends ever since, in spite of him. And after that, we helped facilitate a merger. Jamie and I helped facilitate a merger for my the mental health center I was running. And when we did that, we took all the research and IT assets of the 4 new companies and moved them into a new company that we created that had all the research and information technology responsibilities for the new merged companies. I ran that for 4 years. Went to work for a competitor of ContinuumCloud that I won't name, but it rhymes with PetSmart. And I was with them as chief clinical officer for about 6 years, and then flipped them to a consulting client when I resurrected my consulting practice, and was with them for another 7 years as chief clinical advisor. And I have been doing consulting ever since, and been happily had the opportunity to start working with ContinuumCloud and with Bob and his team. Been a year or so, Bob, something like that.
Yeah, roughly. That's it. I've been here a little over a year, so you've been here about as long as I have.
So it's and that's been a really fun engagement. It's been fun working with Bob, and then that I've been happy to be here with my old friend Jamie.
Well, there you go. All right, Jamie. So
no, so you got the old friend in there. So, so again, Jamie Stewart. I'm a recovering accountant, former CPA. I've been attached to behavioral health in some form or fashion since 1989. Originally as my very first large client as an auditor, and then became the controller for that entity and moved back into private practice doing audits for another third party, amongst other types of entities as well. And then I went to work for Denny in 2000 as his CFO there. And together I grew. I think I went there as an accountant and finance person, and left there as a much more whole behavioral health leader because of Denny, and then what else the team we had together's leadership. When we won a Davies Award for electronic health implementation and how we utilize support for our therapists in the EHR. And I've been at Grafton now since about 2008, originally as the chief administrative officer, and for the past 8 years as the CEO.
So, hey, thank you both for joining. And you can tell the first thing you learn about being a CEO is get really smart people around you. So as you see, there's 2 that are consulting us and are teaching me a lot personally. And I also heard over 80 years of experience. So I think that trumps my 1 year of experience now in behavioral health. So when we were talking the other day, one of the questions that came up, we could have talked about regulatory changes and all the winds of change that are going on. But the first place we went was, how do you balance mission-driven versus running a financially viable or sustainable business in a world that is changing and, going through cuts? And I mean, it's been going on for a long time, things like that, but I'd love to hear your perspective going into that. And What would you recommend to our listeners?
As leaders, the first thing we have to do is analyze and remain calm. It's our job to react to the situations put in front of us. If we've done our job very well, I think you just alluded to a great point. You have your team around you that allows you to do that.
Yeah.
And that has a broad, diverse set of experience that can work together as a team and navigate through difficult times. And I think every one of us who's been in behavioral health expects that about once every 2 to 5 years, because that's just the nature of our funding source and funding streams that has been there historically. So I think that's the first thing. But I think if you think about balancing mission and empathy, the bottom line is there is no mission unless there's a bottom line. And so no entity in the world can continue on operationally if they continue to lose money. Now, let's be clear. We know there are some large for-profit entities that, because of the value of their business model, were able to operate for years and years at a fiscal loss, but they knew the equity coming back to that and the long-term capture of the market would be there. That's a little different than where we sit at in behavioral health, at least as it exists today, which is we have to be focused on delivering the mission in a business model. And again, it's a Denny still in some of our lines we worked on together a long time ago, but we have to be a business with a mission if you're a large enough entity, and that's where we reside right now. So that means paying attention to those things that are mission focused and mission central versus the size of the balance of the budget and what they bring back to the budget. And that doesn't mean you can't operate something at a loss. It just means that you and your board are consciously making that decision, and you have other ways to offset those losses to go forward and keep a stable operations going on, because otherwise you are not able to be there to deliver on your mission in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, riffing off of that, I think, I remember we had lots of conversations, Jamie, about when you have an organization that's called a nonprofit, which first of all I believe is a misnomer, because it kind of implies something that's not true. That it's really a tax classification, and your tax classification doesn't revoke the laws of economics. So, as Jamie said, you got to have more money coming in than you have going out. It doesn't matter what your tax classification is. You're a 501c3, you're a for-profit entity. It doesn't matter. I mean, you just got to have more money coming in than you go out. But a nonprofit, a 501c3, has a social contract to provide something in return for not paying taxes. And so, in our case, it was primarily indigent care. We provided care to people who had no money. When you provide a unit of service of, say, outpatient psychotherapy, that doesn't mean that there's no cost to that. We still had to make payroll to pay the person who did that unit of psychotherapy. It's just that we didn't charge the end user. And so, when you think about that mission thing that Jamie was just talking about, to me, one of the things that I think that there's a lot of organizations, less so than there used to be, but there are still a lot of organizations in this business that kind of think mission is everything, and mission is important. I'm not discounting that, but if you're not here next year to provide services, what good have you done for your mission in the long run? So our job, Jamie and I, when we work together, and Jamie's job now as the CEO, is to assure the long-term survivability of these organizations. And so you have to make difficult choices about what can you afford to do. And so I think when I remember one of the things I tried to do at our center was I wanted to quantify what our mission was. That is, how much indigent care could we afford to provide? It wasn't infinite. It wasn't unlimited. There had to be some cap on it, because we could only afford to do so much. But in my mind, that becomes just another line item. It's like you build your budget and you say, we can afford to provide X dollars of indigent care. You find ways to do that with high quality. You provide financial stability for your organization. You provide high quality customer service. Those three things to me are kind of like the backbone, but financial accountability is core to any business. It doesn't matter what business you're in, whether you're selling cars or providing mental health care. You've got to have a strong financial system to make sure that you're going to be here tomorrow. So to me, that's what I think the fact that it's a turbulent time in this industry, Jamie's smart on it. I mean, this is fairly common in this industry, that when administrations change at the federal or state level, you get the new guy comes in and isn't going to do what the old guy did. I mean, I don't know how many times you've seen this, Bob and Jamie, but
every 2 years.
The last guy did managed care, while the next guy comes in and says, well, that was the wrong thing to do. We're going to fee for service, and vice versa. And things it's because they just they don't want to do what the old guy did. So point is, there's always going to be turbulence and change. There are some aspects of this time around. It is, I think at the federal level, there is more unpredictability than I've ever seen. It's not so much that the policies are challenging. We've had leaders that had policies that were not friendly to behavioral health care. I think in this case, it's not so much that, it's we can't predict where the feds are going to go. And that's almost more disruptive, in my opinion.
Bob, I want to clarify one thing. I think Denny said something that's very important. It's defining indigent. And I think many of us think about indigent as the unemployed and those who don't have any resources at all. And in actuality, at least for our business model and the segment that we're in behavioral health, that's historically untrue, because generally those who have a mental illness and were unemployed, and especially were unemployed because of their mental illness, had a payer source in the form of Medicaid. What you found early on, and I think even today somewhat, but it's the working poor, those that are making money and have enough money to get by, but didn't have enough money for that extra health care need that you see in broader health care. It's not just behavioral health care. And, one of the things the Accountable Care Act did is came along, kind of provided a payer source for some of those services that historically behavioral health had been part of that indigent care or state funding model, so to speak. And so what we've seen is that, that could be under attack as we go through some of the changes in Medicaid, although it really looks like what they're going after right now is the provider tax dollars as much as anything as it relates to Medicaid, and which will really probably hit the hospitals more than it hits them unless the state legislatures redirect funds. And Denny, what do we say? The first place they go to take dollars is from behavioral health care for some reason.
Right. That's right. Think about it. We are one of the only countries in the world that had to pass a law to get parity for mental health care compared to general health care. We're one of the only countries in the world, maybe the only country that I know of. And the point, and it was because mental health was always viewed as kind of the second-class citizen in terms of the healthcare continuum. And that, as Jamie said, that's where, if we're going to cut somewhere, people aren't going to cut diabetic care. They're not going to cut cancer care. They're going to go to behavioral health care and IDD first. I think they'll go to behavioral health before they'll go to IDD. I think I think Jamie's population that he serves at Grafton is, I don't know how to say this any other way, but it's a more sympathetic population than somebody who has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. It's foreign to people, but the idea of helping a kid with Down syndrome, it kind of tugs at your heartstrings. And whereas, somebody who is indigent, is on the street, is, hallucinating, it's hard to relate to somebody like that. And they don't have a good advocacy group. I mean, they got NAMI, and they do wonderful things, but they're not as strong as the pharma industry. They're not as strong as the hospital industry. So I do think that behavioral health is always at kind of at high risk for cuts under any circumstances.
So, Bob, I think that another thing I really another thing we did back in the day, and I thought was very important, because it's very important for us to have board alignment as nonprofits. Remember, our board's working for us as nonprofits, as volunteer, as a nonprofit. We don't have owners. And so making sure the board is aligned. So sometimes you can have a board very vested in an activity you're doing, is it may be important to the community, but it may not be part of your core mission. So one of the things I think Denny did a very good job of with our board at the time, and I brought that forward to keeping my board informed in very similar ways as best I can anyway, is that alignment of what we are doing mission-wise and the bottom of line of that activity and the funding available for that activity versus where it's at. And so then it becomes an easier topic for you and your board to stay on the same page for what you're choosing to do and what is really part of your mission. Now, to be clear, a board can change your mission. That's their power to do. But that is, if we're doing this right, I think we as leaders are part of that conversation. We're not being dragged along with it. We're leading that conversation with our board.
I almost interrupted you earlier, but I'm so intrigued. I enjoy these conversations a lot and I learn from them. But I would say that not-for-profit differs very little in the concept and how you manage a board and where you make decisions, because in a for-profit as well, those that lead and will be around are the ones that reinvest, but you have to make money to reinvest. And what I hear you saying is not-for-profit is the same way. One of my questions on the back end is, how do you make that tough call? I mean, so it is all about basically educating the board. Here's where we want to go, but you sometimes are not in agreement. But how do you make those calls? Those are tough because you are mission driven. I know both of you, and people would say, well, that sounds like a foreign concept. These guys are about making, it's not. It's, that if you're not around, you can't provide services, and your job's to do it well.
I would think that we could, we could give away a ton of services for 1 year, and then we'd be gone. So I guess in a kind of answering your question, Bob, at a higher level, I think first of all, when you become the CEO, if you're getting if you're getting asked to make decisions that are black and white, then you shouldn't be written that decision.
Yeah.
Almost every decision I ever made where I had to ultimately be the final arbiter of that decision, and was a great call. And Jamie and I and we have a third party, Suzanne Kozel, who was our chief clinical officer at the time, our chief
operating officer, COO.
Yeah, she was COO. So she was head of marketing, and then moved into that role. And anyway, Jamie and Suzanne and I would kind of we're the final kind of team. We had a more extended executive team, but we were kind of like the trio that was making the calls. And there were times when I would, I always wanted feedback. I always want feedback, especially if it's different than your opinion. I mean, I don't want yes people working for me. I mean, that's stupid. That's stupid. So anyway, but there were times when Jamie had one opinion, Suzanne had another opinion, and somebody had to make the call, and that was me. That's what the job is. And I guess to answer your question, I always felt like we had three things that everybody in the organization was responsible for: high quality services, fiscal accountability, and customer service. And every decision I ever made was a balance of those things. You provide extra high quality care that nobody pays for. Well, that's probably not a good idea. You can be financially accountable, but that might not be very good customer service in the way that you implement it. And so, I mean, everything was a trade-off of those things. But even though I was the one who made the decision, I would always try to solicit feedback, not just at my senior level, but from middle managers particularly, because they're like the equivalent of sergeants in the Army or NCOs that really run the operation. Their day-to-day stuff is what makes things work for the organization, in my opinion. And getting their opinions about things, and then letting them know that, okay, here was the decision. Here's how we came to that decision. You're not all going to agree with it. And we're not, this is not a democracy. I do want your feedback, but it's not like we're going to vote on this and, decide whether or not we're going to take Medicaid or not. I mean, I'm sorry, that ain't going to happen. Yeah. But that's the nature of the job. And I think, and I don't know about you, Jamie, I felt different the day I became CEO from the day before I became CEO. That when I got into that position, first of all, I was thinking, what in the heck were they thinking hiring me? That was the first thing. But what
desperation, Denny, desperation.
I had lots of theory. But the second was like, people expect things of me now that they didn't expect of me yesterday. Did you experience that, Jamie?
I had a little bit luckier transition than you did, Denny, in that I was in place as I transitioned to that role. I think the bigger thing for me was the weight of responsibility, especially what Jim told me. Tim Gammer's the person I stepped in to replace here at Grafton, but was Jamie, you go to bed every night knowing that you're least experienced, most at risk, the most at risk people that are serving the community. In our case, the entire state of Virginia. And your least skilled, least trained staff are the one taking care of them every night. And we go to sleep with that thinking, buddy. And he's been, I had a personality before that I really thought, well, that's not going to bother me. But it does. I know you can't lie. It does. But, because I think something Denny said there was very important. And going back to your question, Bob, is how do you make those hard decisions? And I think you have to start at the end. And in the end, I'm back to, we're here to deliver a mission. If we're not here, we can't deliver on that mission. The challenge that we have in behavioral health is we're a human services organization. And we have humans at both ends of this. You have humans that we're delivering services to, but right now, as it stands technology-wise, it may not be this way forever. We're delivering those services with humans. So any decision we make fiscally is going to affect one end of that continuum, so to speak. To save money, you either have to pay less or do it with less people, or you're delivering less services if you continue. And that's the challenge I think that we face. But what Denny said is, you go back to, you have to make a call sometimes. And my very first, I told this story the other day. I'm gonna retell it here because I think it's an important one. My first critical interaction with Denny was after I had become a single father and made a move to Indiana to work for him. Had to deliver him some very tough information about 5 months later. And that information was, hey, we're going to be through our line of credit and not have any cash in the next 6 months. And what he turns and he says, well, what are you going to do about it? And it was a great lesson for me at the time. And that it wasn't, he had hired me to provide him options, not to come to him looking for answers. And so I go back to, you make those hard decisions because you prepared for those hard decisions by having the right people around you to begin with. And that's the important, and that may be an investment in and of itself, because the right people and good people don't always come the cheapest.
Yeah, just kind of prelude to that story, just kind of as a backstory. I had been there. See, that you came on in 2000. I got there in 1997. So I've been there about 3 years. I've been through two CFOs already. I inherited one.
Tell me that.
Yeah, I mean. And the bottom line, the second one was just a personality problem. But the first one, he was a phenomenal controller. He wasn't a CFO. If I said to him, what are we going to do about that? He'd say, I don't know. What do you want to do about it? It was that kind of thing. And, I challenged this guy to change something very fundamental about something we were doing that technically was outside our contract, and he didn't do it. And frankly, that's why we parted friends. I mean, he's a great guy, but he did not have the skills that Jamie had. When you look for somebody at that level, you want somebody who understands being a controller, understanding the financials, but also who could also lead. And that's oftentimes a tough combination, but we ended up organizationally, looking for those multiple kinds of skills, even at our middle management level, where I inherited people who were in management that should never have been in management. And the only reason they were they were clinicians who took the job of director of outpatient or something like that.
Yeah, for money.
Only because they could make a couple bucks more. And we said, we got to get a career path for those folks, because they really don't want to do management. There's nothing about that that's attractive to them, and they weren't very good at it. So we started flipping the script and saying, you got to learn how to fire people. You got to run a P&L. You got to run your budget. And they'd say, well, I don't want to do that. And I said, then get out of that job and get into what you're good at.
Do what you're best at. Yeah.
Seeing patients, and seeing clients. And it's about, people need multiple skills. But if you're in management, and I mean at any level of management, the skills to be a manager are different than the skills of being a clinician. And you got to let go of some of the stuff you used to do as a clinician to be a good manager. And
hardest thing about leadership is learning what you're not going to do or going to do and what to do. I mean, maybe different than what you want to do. But the hardest thing to do is learn where you're not needed anymore, or it's okay if someone does it differently.
That's probably the best skill. My experience is it's not important to know what you're good at, because that bubbles up really quick. It's what are you not good at, and it gets somebody around you that knows what they're doing.
Absolutely. And Jamie's such a good CFO. It tells you how bad I was at numbers.
So I heard some themes through this. It was basically put a darn good team around you. Make sure that you understand where everything is, and you're running a financially sustainable model, and know where the dollars are, know where the funding is, know how your team's doing. So it's almost like a COO kind of role. But I did hear a couple other things. I heard innovation, and I heard strategy. I want to hit strategy first. And you, Denny, you and I've been in healthcare for a while. So you're right. fundamentally, there are healthcare changes every 2 to 4 years. Big ones, maybe they're longer, like we saw just recently or about to see recently if the big bill is passed. Strategic versus tactical planning. How do you view those? And we had a good discussion the other day. Fortunately, I get to talk with these gentlemen from time to time, and I'm very fortunate or blessed to do that. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how do you balance the two, and which one's the most important, or are they both important? And what makes those successful?
I'm a firm believer. I don't believe, at least for our industry, in what many people think of as classical strategic planning. I said before, if your funding stream and models are going to change every 3 to 5 years, developing a plan longer than that cycle seems kind of ludicrous. You don't just do it because your accrediting agency tells you got to check a box and have a strategic plan. There are other things you can do to balance that and offset that. So I think the bigger thing for me is that how do you actualize based upon the information you have available to you at the time? I think one thing that's happening right now that's so dynamic, Bob, is that, and Denny mentioned it, is there's still some uncertainty of what's going to happen. Once we have a little bit more certainty, which, by the way, I think the Senate bill provides us a little bit more clarity right now. So I think it'll be very difficult for the House to make changes to what came over. So I think we're probably 90% along the way where we're going to end up at this point, if not further. So now we need to plan from that. And then is that plan, if you think about it, in my mind, is a 3 to 4 year plan at most, because there'll be a whole new administration coming in. We don't know what's going to happen. In our case, and the behavioral health has an additional challenge to that. It's state by state. We don't get to create a national model and have the same challenge. And in fairness, I think that same thing is going to happen to our primary healthcare system now, because we don't know what those state-by-state provider tax models are that each state has implemented. And that appears to be where the Medicaid cuts are going to come. I don't know how much other cuts are going to affect healthcare other than those things at this point. And there may be some stuff I'm missing. I mean, I know CHIP is going to be a shared model now, which it wasn't before. But as you think about strategic planning from the standpoint, I'm literally doing this right now with my own board as I prepare for the fiscal year end. We have a one-day retreat that's much different than a normal board meeting every year now, where my team owns their area, and we're going to talk about what happened in the prior fiscal year we just ended, what happens in this coming fiscal year we just budgeted for, and how did you deliver your budget, and what affected those thoughts, both operationally and strategically and environmentally from a regulatory standpoint. And then tell me what you're seeing on the horizons for year 2 to 3, 4. And that's where our board becomes in, because their role, at least at Grafton, the role of my board is to provide that strategic leadership about where they expect us to deliver the company. And then we're the experts in our business. Our board isn't built by nothing but behavioral healthcare experts. We have education staff, we have fiscal staff, we have bankers, we have healthcare staff, we have mothers that have disabled children. And so our job is to make sure they are informed about the environment and then help lead us where Grafton needs to go and hold us accountable to that product at the end. And so that's my version of strategic planning. It's not laying out this 1, 3, 5 year plan. It is an adaptable model that allows us to move forward, because it's just, if you're going to lay something out but have your rug pulled off from under you, why do that?
Yeah, I agree. I think we started off with doing our traditional strategic planning, and they were obsolete within a few months of being published. And so we transitioned to like a strategic initiatives, a set of 5 or so strategic initiatives that told us the big picture of where we were going. And I think, kind of linking back something we were talking about earlier. One of the things that this industry is pretty good at is kind of like taking on new things, but they're not very good at jettisoning things that they shouldn't be doing anymore. And I think that's a big part of the strategy part. And it's also cultural. It's like getting the idea of letting go of things, maybe for financial reasons, but maybe not only that. Sometimes it's other reasons, but to get that as part of the culture of the organization, saying we will let things go. And that's hard for a lot of people, because they've been doing particular service line or seeing a certain population for a long time, and they really like seeing them, and maybe you're really good at it, but there's no funder for it, or there's a funder but you can't access those funds, and maybe those people ought to go being seen somewhere else, because there is a funding stream attached, and we're not going to go after that. It's just out of our core business. So learning how to let go of stuff is kind of critical, I think. But I think part of it is for people like in Jamie's position, the CEO's got to like paint a vision. It's like, okay, this train's heading north. North looks like this. Here's what we're trying to accomplish to get there. But then help getting your managers to adopt that and say, now, how does that translate into my book of business? Because one of the things I always used to tell my middle managers is you should know your business better than I know your business. If that's not the case, then why are you in that position?
Yeah.
You should be telling me stuff that I don't know, not me telling you stuff that you don't know. It should be that's an upward transition. And if you get them to understand the why of what they're doing tactically, which is the strategy for the organization, then they've got a context into which they're providing the service line. And they can make strategic decisions and make strategic recommendations. I mean, it's interesting that I think a kind of an old traditional model of strategic planning is kind of a top-down model, but I think it's really more kind of bottom up. And once you lay the vision out, it's like now everybody can kind of line up, okay, my book of business does this, and this fits with strategic initiative 1, 2, and 7, or whatever, and they can see where they're lined up. And
you know what that's called in finance, Denny? Zero-based budgeting. It's the same thing. It really is. He's right. But I think it is important here because some of our peers, especially in behavioral health, I'm very lucky at Grafton. And then I think to an extent we had a very similar situation in Indiana in that we were able to recruit our board members. They weren't placed for us by a government body or another entity, so to speak. Yeah. And so we're able to I've been lucky to recruit the individuals that I see our board needs to fill a strategic niche. I literally have a matrix. We have a matrix of 9 boxes. Like, I want this skill sets on my board. I need so many of each people in that skill set. So I'm able to recruit to that. So that really helps because remember, in the end, it is the board that owns the strategic vision of your corporation or your nonprofit, and you have to deliver to, including who's leading the company and bringing that vision to bear, to be very clear. And so I think I'm very lucky in that I have been able to surround myself with a board and people who want to be there for the right reasons and also have some of the skill sets we need to help us drive that vision strategically in all what I think of as the aspects of business that we do, which is fiscal, clinical, and presence. And presence being communication, marketing, although we don't do a lot of marketing, but those are the 3 areas that we have to reside in. How do we communicate with those we're serving and those that serve us? Denny, you mentioned something earlier, and I thought I wanted to point this out. If you think about customers in our line of business, we don't have a customer. We have customers, and for the same service, we have a customer of who we're delivering the service to. We may have a customer of a third party that is managing that individual delivery. And by managing, I may be responsible for them either through guardianship or through another relationship with the government. And then you have a governmental entity maybe that owns the fiscal relationship for that, or a payer that owns a fiscal relationship. So at any given time, my staff have 3 customers that they're having to think about. And so that affects your strategy and how you look at strategic vision as well. It's a broader concept than just a sales model, so to speak.
Well, my vision, or my definition of a customer is anybody who can affect the transaction of services for payment.
That's right.
Oh.
That's exactly right.
So that person sitting in front of you is not writing the check necessarily. It could be, you got an extra 30 first. If they have insurance, your insurance company is a customer of sorts because they can affect whether you get paid or not. So that's the kind of the global definition of that. But I think, you, Bob, you mentioned that kind of we got off on the strategy versus tactic. I admit I had a real flashback to when I first got to the mental health center. My predecessor, he did a really nice job of taking the organization to where it was, but he couldn't make the pivot to what it was going to become and thinking about it as a business and that kind of thing. So I'm on the job for maybe a week or 2, and I'm getting these chits to sign for $5, $8, $10. And I go to my executive assistant who I inherited from him, and she goes, well, John signed all those things. I said, well, that ain't going to happen anymore. I said, they're talking about not being able to differentiate that kind of like strategy versus tactic stuff. And I think when you think about it, it's like part of our job is to figure out how do you get people, including the CEO, how do you get people to do what only they can do, and delegate, especially if you're the CEO, delegate everything else. What is it that only I can do as a CEO, and start delegating that's the rest of that stuff, or just stop doing it altogether. So I'm not signing $5 chits anymore. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. Somebody else can do that.
Yeah.
One of the reasons Denny brought me on was at the time, the behavioral healthcare industry was going through a flux, and it had in the previous 5 years about really shifting from a grant-based, state-based funding model to a managed care model. So it became very important to understand what it cost you to deliver a unit of service. And I think about the strategy that happened in 2000 and what we had to do to set that up and what we needed from our electronic record, our healthcare, our finance system, our payroll system, to be able to answer that question to where we're going in the future, which is we need to be paid to deliver an outcome or a result, not a service. Yeah. Now, that in some of our services, particularly in brain health and behavioral health, that's very difficult because there's so many independent variables that affect the mind and the needs of individuals and things like that. But that doesn't mean that's not what payers are looking for, because that's exactly what they're looking for. So it's our job then as leaders to think about the strategic role of how to possibly deliver something like that or get there, or maybe more importantly, give them an alternative. I do believe that everybody's rational. They're looking for the same thing. And I think many of the paid side is looking to reduce their cost, obviously. Yep. But I think the other side is there is still investment. If we've learned one thing over the last 5 years in COVID and going forward, I don't believe behavioral health is the redheaded stepchild it used to be.
Nope.
And I think what we're seeing is that, Denny, I hope that it'll be less likely to bear the brunt of any cuts going forward because of that. In fact, I think we're now learning through research that the behavioral healthcare industry can lower the cost on the primary side, and that if you attack that first, a preventative style model. Now, the problem is that we all know the first thing that goes when there are tight budgets is prevention. And so that's our job, to be on the forefront as we think strategically about how we're going to protect behavioral health as a preventative model on primary health costs. Because whether we like it or not, primary health budgets and numbers and lobbying has a much better, stronger position than we do at this time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that whole business of integrated care and cost offset of behavioral health and the effects it has on primary care has really come a long way, and I think a lot of people understand that. I do a podcast, and I had on my podcast Chuck Ignolia, who's the CEO of the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, and Al Guida, who's their lobbyist, who's been with behavioral health with the National Council for 20 years, and they were doing kind of a state of the state message about where we stand. And one of the really interesting points that Chuck made was you've got to remember that mental health care has always been a bipartisan issue in every Congress.
Exactly right.
It affects everyone. It doesn't discriminate between political parties or House versus Senate. It hits everybody. And so it's really reinforcing your point that I think we really do have. I don't think it's a doom and gloom time for us. I mean, I think we're going to have challenges. There's no question.
We need to deliver answers. We owe them answers and solutions. We can't just be a victim. We can't step back and play the helpless victim. It's our job to deliver positive answers that are part of a fiscal solution. And I think if I'm going to say one thing, and Denny, you alluded to this earlier, we have had a transition in leadership and behavioral health. And by that, I mean, we started out in the behavioral health movement in the late 60s, started out with people who really knew that there needed to be a service delivered to the population that was totally underserved or unserved. And I think we've evolved now to where we have a lot of good mental health practitioners that are good business leaders as well. We're better positioned now than we've ever been as an industry to deliver solutions as part of the answer to our politicians if they'll listen to us.
Has that changed the type of CEOs that are emerging in behavioral health, and where they're coming from, as opposed to, because I've seen it in other industries as well. Like at one time, it was all CFOs, and that, there were tech, and that, it rolls from time to time, or those that came from sales. Are you seeing that in behavioral health, and those that are becoming the emerging CEOs, or those in training?
Well, yeah, I think my generation, like me, were clinicians who came up through the ranks and had to learn business. And Jamie is representative of the next generation who comes in with a business background. He has an MBA, and Jamie was a former chair of NHCA's board. And would you say, what's the percentage of MHCA members that have MBAs, Jamie?
I believe we're around 60% now that have some type of business background as well as a clinical background, or just a business background. And it really has shifted. We got to be really careful though. Denny probably never thought he'd hear me say this, but the heart of who and what we are is our services. And while I believe we really do need to shift away from the social service model to a more business-oriented model, we do have to understand that the populations we serve many times don't have other options, especially if you're on the community mental health side. And so while we need to lead from a fiscal and business standpoint about mission-oriented, going back to that empathy, we can't lose the empathy that grounds us.
There you go. I love it. That's the balance. One thing you hit on too, and it doesn't differ in the for-profit as well, is the annual priorities, or the things you work on. I had a very good mentor in the last 10 years or so. And basically we had 3 corporate priorities, and that was it, 3 to 5. And we do, and currently in ContinuumCloud, if you're doing more than that, you're not doing the other things that you should be doing well. So I resonated totally with that. And then you put I'm fortunate we have a good board. We might not get to pick, but you generally get to pick because you sign on to do these, and you also put a good staff around you. And when you do that, you're getting all kinds of feedback and guidance and tempering that. Am I heading in the right direction? So
I think the challenge we're seeing right now in behavioral health leadership, and I'll speak for me, I shouldn't speak for any of my peers, but we have a lot of lights flashing red right now.
Yeah.
And it's not a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 demand. It's a tier 1, A, B, C. And how are you choosing which one you're focusing on? Because the other one could blow. And quite honestly, that decision, that's where strategic planning is really difficult right now. That decision may change in a quarter's time, or with an incident or something that occurs either politically or with your service mix that you have to adapt to. And I'll go back because there's a repeating theme here. Have the team. Have the team.
There you go. That's what I was going to ask. And then what's the difference between the tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 in your mind, just for those that are less educated as you?
Well, I don't know that's a flying answer, and it changes by time. But for right now, I think we all, as a leadership standpoint, need to be abreast of what is our customers, all 4, 3, 5 of them, expecting from us, and add a new one. What are our funding sources and the political realm willing to help us do to achieve that customer service? And, when you think, again, at behavioral health level, I do think the AHA, the American Hospital Association, and AMA has a very strong national positioning lobby. And there's multiple sources of lobbyists coming in from that perspective. And I think you have a system of primary health that can be adaptable across state lines. And so I always joke that you can take a hospital in the middle of Manhattan and drop it in a desert in New Mexico, and 98, 99% of operations, how you code services, how you do the services, is all the same. But in actuality, in behavioral health, we have a service called the same thing that is nowhere near alike from one state to the next. And so we have some challenges at our level, at much more of a state level maybe than primary care has. So us staying abreast of what's happening within our state, or states in my case, how are we going to react to the behavioral health system within that, and how do I best represent my board, my community, and those we're serving?
And you pulled on a thread there, and we had it on the agenda. How do you feel about where the industry is going from a consolidation, or is it going to be a bunch of small independent practices? What is your vision there? Because generally when you hear funding, it's usually people looking for synergies, et cetera.
I think that we're kind of a case study, or when Jamie and I were together, we made a decision that, we were a $20 million mental health center, and we believed it was too small to survive in the long haul. And the best option for us was to do a merger. And the merger evolved beyond what we had originally planned. It was originally going to be just with one mental health center in Indiana, but it ended up being a cross-state merger, ultimately of 4 organizations. But the point of it, the reason that we decided that, and the reason that the board was willing to go along with it was that issue that we talked about. It's like our job is to perpetuate this organization to be able to provide services, and that the people that we serve get care. Then perpetuating the name of the organization is irrelevant. Perpetuating kind of the things that we've always held near and dear, that's not important. What's important is that these people get services. And so we did that. We had, there are things we probably would have done differently knowing what we know now, Jamie, but we did do it, and it has been successful, and they're still providing good services. So I think as these political changes and funding changes happen, and it becomes more important to have, for example, having a good EHR, that's that costs money, and organizations that can't afford that are probably need to go away, frankly, and merge with somebody who can't afford that. I've seen organizations in this industry that go from, like Jamie's, that are really well run, sophisticated, financially solid, clinically good model, what they're doing, to at the other end being, how in the heck are you still in business? And those organizations, I call them the mom and pop shops, they're probably too small. They don't have the resources. They don't have the vision or the culture to survive in the long run. And they probably need to get absorbed by somebody larger. And so I think our merger was one of the first ones nationally. It kind of kicked off a trend. Certainly in Indiana, there were a couple of mergers that happened right after that. I think it's probably going to be a good thing, actually, Bob. I think for the most part, organizations that can't stand on their own will either go under or they'll merge into somebody, I think.
Bob, you make hard decisions when times are good, and when times are bad, some of the if you're making hard decisions, then it may be too late, and I think that's leads to some mergers and acquisitions. But if you just look, I think it was last Friday, British Petroleum and Shell announced they were going to merge. Now, they're not doing this because they're too small, and they're not doing this because they're not profitable. So there are multiple reasons why entities merge or come together, and theoretically, it's because of symbiotism makes something, the whole is less than the part, or more than the parts. In behavioral health, I think there's several dynamics at play here, and Denny hit one of them, I think, square on the head. And I hate to come back to my fiscal roots, but we talked a little bit about it earlier. I think we're in a time right now where we're being asked to deliver data and outcomes and results information that unless you have the right systems behind you, you're not going to be able to deliver those answers, or even a part of those answers. I still don't think they're going to be perfect because the tools aren't perfect here and the information we have is not perfect. But again, 80-20 rule. If you have it, you better make a call. But so I think what we're looking at is in our industry right now, there are several dynamic factors that probably lead to that it's a good decision to be bigger. And not being bigger just to be bigger, but because to have the right electronic health record, to have the right payroll system and HR system behind it, and by the way, timekeeping system and other things to allow you to understand those costs, not per unit, but per service outcome, groups of services that delivered an outcome. And the same thing on the fiscal and finance side. Well, you pull that together, all of a sudden you're looking at a very, very large IT system. Well, Bob, you'll be able to speak to this better than us, but a CIO in today's world makes more than 90% of the CEOs in behavioral health. And so we're looking at just basic fiscal priorities that say, okay, unless you're of a certain size, you're not going to be able to deliver what the market is demanding from you. If you can't deliver what the market's demanding from you, someone else will, and you're going to be replaced anyway. So why not look for that good solution that you work with together? I think the other thing here, we kind of mentioned this the other day too, that is shaping us, is as the AI and how we bring on technology and utilize technology is changing our industry as well. maybe we don't need to be bigger. Maybe we need to be smaller, but leveraging more AI to handle some of the things that we no longer need to do as humans that AI can handle. And I think we're starting to see that shift somewhat. I think that's dramatically going to change us as community mental health centers, Grafton as a nonprofit in behavioral health, how we go forward and how we look at things. And so those things will drive, again, the need for resources. You all kind of laughed the other day, but I can see a world where some of my human capital is replaced by non-human capital, robotics, AI, and other things. And that may be the best thing for the population I'm serving. It's not there yet, but I in no way can invest in that unless I have the right pieces in place behind me. That may mean being bigger or spending less in certain areas so we can invest in that. And that's the kind of decisions we lead as CEOs and leadership in times.
I think we're running out of time, but I wanted to hit on the AI and tech, but we learned a lot, and thank you very much. I did have one parting question to close out, if that's okay for both of you. And what gives you hope for the future of behavioral health, IDD, whatever, in our industry?
I do think the technology at some point is going to be a game changer. It's already starting to influence us. And I think there will be a place for client-facing tools like apps that will help with mindfulness and depression and other things, and even avatars, AI avatars, where for basic problems, I think we will get to an AI technology that clients can just call into or log into and get actually get good help.
Yep.
I mean, we're projecting 500,000 clinician positions unfilled in the next 15 years. So the idea that we can only do this through people, I think AI is giving us an opportunity to say, maybe not. Maybe some of this stuff could be done by an AI. And we know that's kind of preliminary stuff on AI with clinicians or functioning as kind of quasi-therapists or just chatbots, that there's a group of clients that do better with that than they would actually do with a clinician, in part because they trust the AI more because they're not going to be judged, or they don't feel like they're going to be judged by a human being. Technology's in its infancy; it's going to get better. So I think that's one of the things that gives me hope. I do think that change that represents where Jamie is versus where I was in terms of as leaders, having a strong fiscal background and also understanding the mission, the vision of what the organization, what is the beating heart of the organization. These should be businesses with a heart, is the way I look at them. It's not just, you have to be a business, but you still have a mission and you still have this, you're providing something unique to the communities that you serve. And that's not being lost by people like Jamie, who are coming in, who don't come up through a clinical rank like I did. But they're perpetuating that vision and that mission and the importance of being able to serve the people that we want to serve.
Beautiful.
I'm going to kind of riff off of that, if you don't mind, Bobby. I don't know what our time is like, but
4 minutes. Yep, keep going.
But I'm excited for a couple reasons. Number one, I think for the first time we have technology that is really going to change how we know how to serve individuals. It's more than just the AI. We're getting wearable data now that's providing feedback, and I do believe we'll eventually be able to use some video technology on the population we serve that'll help provide useful feedback and in real time, leveraging AI. And that's the cusp of it. But I think the other piece of this is something I said earlier. And as bad as COVID and then maybe our response to COVID was, what it has done is made everybody aware of behavioral health. So Denny mentioned something 5 or 10 minutes ago about parity was such a big thing and how we had to adopt that, and we were behind the rest of the world. And that was a big thing. But there still has always been a theoretical stigmatism in some ways around behavioral health care needs. And that's whether we like it or not, that's affected funding. It's affected acceptance and everything else. Well, that's not true, and I'm not sure it's true at all anymore. People are very outspoken about their mental health care needs now. And you have leaders talking about it. You have community leaders. You have politicians. You have actors. You have business leaders that recognize their needs. And that historically hasn't been where we're at. So if you're looking for positivity, I think we're at a cusp of a situation. Denny, I wasn't young enough. Actually, I wasn't even born yet when this was said, but when John Kennedy said something, we are finally at a place where we can put a man on the moon. I think we're at the cusp of behavioral health from both a service model, an acceptance model, and a fiscal model to deliver better care than we've ever done to more people and more populations, and deliver a better result than we've ever been able to do. And I think the politicians on any side of the aisle are in on that. It's our job to deliver that message.
This was outstanding. So, thank you both very much. And I think there'll be a future podcast with both of you back on again. We went through about half. For anybody who didn't see, we had an agenda that was much longer than this, but this is so meaningful. We learn a lot, and I generally get the opportunity to learn and stay out of the way. So thank you very much for what you do for the industry.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye, Bob. Bye, Denny.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the CloudCare podcast. We hope you found value in this episode. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. For more information on ContinuumCloud, the only platform built for behavioral health, feel free to visit our website, ContinuumCloud.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and we hope you'll join us soon in the next episode of the CloudCare podcast.